Right now, it looks like chemical weapons were used by the Syrian government to kill its own citizens. The question is, what should the U.S. do now? And next, we're inching closer to primary day. Who will make it through, and how should they try to distinguish themselves in a crowded field? And later, you're fired. Trump accused of fraud as usual, but Donald not taking these allegations lying down. We will have the latest. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thanks so much for joining us this Monday evening, August 26. Now, all eyes tonight on Syria. That is, images of alleged chemical weapons attack have begun to pour into the States. It was just over a year ago when President Obama said the use of chemical weapons was a game changer.
A red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized. That would change my calculus. That would change my equation.
But as recently as Friday, the president still appeared to waver on how to proceed.
The notion that the U.S. can somehow solve what is a sectarian, complex problem inside of Syria sometimes is overstated.
But delay can be deadly, right, Mr. President?
There is no doubt that when you start seeing chemical weapons used on a large scale, and again, we're still gathering information about this particular event, but it is very troublesome.
There's strong proof they used them already, though, in the past.
Then that starts getting to some core national interests that the United States has.
Okay, but images that we're going to be showing you shortly here may have changed some of this dynamic. Today, Secretary of State John Kerry, he had harsh words for the Assad regime, and he said that the Obama administration would hold the Syrian government, quote, accountable for what he called a moral obscenity. Our senior political correspondent Andrew Whitman is here with the latest.
Well, that's right, Rich. Secretary Kerry says it's, quote, undeniable the chemical weapons were used to kill hundreds of Syrian civilians last week in a stronghold of rebel forces. In Washington and in the Mideast, many now wondering if military action is close in hand.
Secretary of State John Kerry did not mince words, saying there is no doubt the Syrian regime used chemical weapons against its own people.
The indiscriminate slaughter of civilians, the killing of women and children and innocent bystanders by chemical weapons is a moral obscenity.
Kerry accused the Syrian regime of destroying evidence of last week's attack and said the U.S. is conferring with world leaders about an appropriate response.
All peoples and all nations who believe in the cause of our common humanity must stand up to assure that there is accountability.
U.S. Navy destroyers, submarines, and fighter jets positioned in the Mediterranean Sea are moving closer to Syria, ready to act if President Obama decides to strike against Bashar al-Assad's regime. Today, UN chemical weapons investigators traveled to the scene of one of the apparent chemical gas attacks, where they interviewed survivors and doctors and collected samples. And on the way to the site, the team was attacked by sniper fire.
Despite such very dangerous circumstances, our team returned to Damascus and replaced their cars.
The Syrian government accuses the rebels of firing at the UN team. Opposition forces say a pro-government militia was behind the attack. Meanwhile, the White House has provided few clues about what it plans to do.
This violation has to be taken very seriously, and the President is consulting with his national security team.
As the international community weighs options, the Russians are now warning that Western military intervention in Syria would be a huge mistake. Rich?
All right, Andrew, thank you. Let's bring in our first guest, Lara Satrakian, the co-founder and managing editor of Syria Deeply. She has spent more than 5 years as a foreign correspondent covering the Middle East for ABC News and Bloomberg Television. She's kind enough to join us now by phone from London. Lara, thank you for a few minutes. We just lost our connection. We'll try and reestablish it. But I want to bring in our panel on this here because there's obviously a humanitarian, a foreign policy, and also political considerations on all of this. Let's bring in a few of our favorites here. Tom Doherty, partner at Mercury, a former advisor to New York Governor George Pataki. Dominic Card, of course, political journalist, author. Richard Brodsky, former New York State Assemblyman, senior fellow at Demos and professor at NYU. And Andrew Whitman, who you've already met. All right, let's talk what the options are for the president right now. Then we'll get into the politics and everything else. conceivably there could be airstrikes. Obviously, the first thing they're going to try and do, and we've heard reports all day, Tom, that they're trying to round up international support behind this. We already know the resolution. You're going to have Russia and China sign on, and one or both of them might say no. If they say no, what's at the president's disposal, and what should he do?
What he's going to do is he is going to take a couple of missiles and fire them at some government facilities there and say, this is a retaliation for using, these terrible weapons. That's what he's going to do. We have 100,000 people dead in Syria. Either you want to play in the game or not play in the game. And that's quite frankly why he should have met with Putin a few weeks ago. If you're serious about this, you had a chance to sit down with Putin one-on-one instead of canceling the stupid meeting with him. Sit down and figure this out. Otherwise, he said a year ago, if they use chemical weapons, there'll be a price to pay. The price to pay is going to be a couple of missiles landing on some government buildings. We warned you. Assad is very powerful there right now. He's gaining strength every single day. He's got the backing of Russia. This is not going to end. It's not going to end pretty.
Is there, Richard, you think, an argument that the president gave a confusing mixed message a week or so ago, and then it became a misread by Assad, that, you know what, this isn't our problem?
Now, the president has done exactly the right thing. He's kept the United States out of another military adventure, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. The only thing worse than Assad are the people who want to replace him. And for the United States to move into that will set loose a set of dynamics which will not be in the American interest and will not be in the interest of the Syrian people.
Okay, 1 second though, because I want, next segment as a group here, I want to talk about where is the line for the United States. So we'll agree, we're the last real military superpower in the world when it comes to human atrocities. When is it our job and not our job to get involved, whether it's a policeman or whatever else? But for now, isn't that a false choice that either military intervention means boots on the ground?
I didn't say that. Military intervention means military intervention. It opens a new dynamic. You don't know where it's going to go. The president has kept the United States out of an unbelievably complicated and unwinnable situation. That is in the American
national... He said himself, when we played it, that once they go to chemical weapons, that crosses the red line. Tom's probably right here. Aren't we looking at a couple Tomahawks into Damascus?
He's not. Leave it at that.
How so?
You don't know what the president.
No, he does.
They have signaled. Kerry all but said today they will get a couple of missiles fired at them, and that'll be it. If you read the stories correctly today, what do you think they'll do?
What I hope they do.
What do you think they will do? Not what you hope they will do.
Is nothing.
So where does it end? When they kill 1 million Syrians with nerve gas?
We are going to use American military power every time there is an internal and atrocity, which this is. Then the use of that is unlimited. You guys got us into Afghanistan. You guys got us into Iraq. We guys got you into Vietnam.
How many of you guys voted to get us into Afghanistan, to get us into Iraq? When it was nice after 9/11.
I don't want to refight Afghanistan and Iraq right now. I want to figure out. Okay, but Andrew, let's go over what the options are. As most foreign policy experts, if we could bring up, Elise, the graphic over here, we have what many people say are military options, including, thank you guys, which Richard said, which is wait this thing out here and let this thing get resolved within Syria. Or you can arm the rebels here, which has been talking about for a long time, which we've resisted. You could do, as Tom mentioned, which is limited strikes. Right now, we have off the coast here both destroyers that have Tomahawk capabilities, as much as 100 Tomahawks that they could fire in here. Or we could do a no-fly zone, frankly, something I don't understand why we haven't enforced to this point. Drone strikes, as everybody knows, or finally an option that I don't think any of us want or believe will happen, which is, once again, military presence in the form of boots on the ground.
Well, I mean, I hate to answer a question with a question, but what's the end game? What's the result that we're looking for by taking military action? Is it to retard and prevent the ability to use chemical weapons against the Syrian people? Is it regime change? Because if it's regime change, then Richard's point about not knowing who replaces Assad and not knowing if that's worse than what we already have becomes a serious issue. That also impacts the different range of things that we can do. We can certainly try to cripple their ability to use chemical weapons against their own people.
Okay, I'm going to put you, though, into a situation room. I'm going to put you in where both military and the policy advisors have to say, did it change for you when you saw pictures of children killed by nerve gas and chemical gas, the very standard that the president said was a threshold we would not allow them to cross. Did that change anything for you from a week ago? He said it exactly.
He didn't
Richard.
say you wouldn't allow him to do it. He said it was a game changer.
Right. So
what does a game changer mean?
No
look
one
at
knows.
those pictures.
But he didn't define it, Richard. He didn't. He just said the red line. He didn't define what it means. I mean, I think we can all agree that there won't be any boots on the ground. I don't think the American people will go for that.
Well, something.
But I think it's going to be something. It's increasingly becoming a situation of when, not if. Now, what it's going to be, I don't know if I agree with Tom. I think I would agree with more with the sentiment of Richard. The American people are not going to tolerate the military after we've just gotten out of 2 wars.
You don't think they're
going into another? What's the reason?
Wait, all he said was
Richard, are we the policemen of the world?
But wait a second.
Every time there's something going on in the world,
somebody
the
uses
American
nerve
military.
gas?
Every time something's going on in the world, the American military is going to get involved. I don't think we can afford that, nor the will of the American people.
Wait, I didn't say put boots on the ground because I really don't give a damn about Syria.
And I think most Americans don't.
But when they're nerve gassing people, I think we need to send a strong signal that we will not tolerate that, and dropping a few bombs on locations where they produce that facility needs to be done.
Okay, but maybe it will. We don't know.
What would you do?
Well, I'm not the
Just
president.
watch.
I'm not the president of the United
We're here to say what would you do. I know you're not president.
Okay. Well, I certainly wouldn't put American lives at harm.
But I think that there's almost, and Richard, where I disagree is, there's a misstatement in terms of the costs. We all know the costs, and we've learned them in unbelievable way in both Iraq and to a degree in Afghanistan, in terms of blood and treasure. However, there is a cost of inaction also. Syria doesn't just resolve itself nice and neatly here and they have some resolution. Now all of a sudden the world and the region is looking at all of a sudden chemical weapons being used there.
A sectarian fight between a largely Sunni population, some Shia and some Alawite for control of Syria. There is no American national self-interest in deciding which of those sects or groups is going to control that country. The American self-interest here is to minimize the human cost of this internal battle, but not to do what we did in Vietnam, which is pick a side.
Time out, though. If you want to minimize the human cost, and they've already established that they're willing to use chemical gas on their own people, including women and children, if we've already established that they'll go there, then how do you do that without some form of military intervention?
I really understand how it matters to the victim by what means they're killed, the innocent victim. In other words, we wouldn't go in if they were submachine gunning children, but we will go in if they're gassing them. That sort of practical and moral calculus.
Well, the administration themselves already made clear lines.
No, they didn't make clear lines. They made muddy, indistinct lines that other people thought were clear. And I think that was the way to handle the situation. There are some times when the consequences of action are likely to be so much worse than the consequences of inaction that you just can't do
But one
anything.
second. I'm with Tom. Anybody at this table believe what John Kerry, what the Secretary of State came out and said today was not a very clear decision to say, listen, we're going to try and round up enough countries to get behind us, so this isn't all on us, but we're going to do something. They're not just going to do an angry little message that came out today without something that's going to follow it, I think, in the next 72, 96 hours. It's going to happen. Anybody think it won't?
I don't know. I thought it was going to happen in Libya, and it happened, and it was not helpful. I thought it was going to happen when we were going to pull out of Afghanistan. We aren't. These things start with good intentions and a sense of anger at an injustice, and they end up in conflicts that we can't control.
You just touched on something that we want to come to when we get out of break. Dominic asked the best question. What is our job as the United States? When, even if we don't give a bleep about the country, is it our job or not to get involved here? And what does involvement look like? What should it cost the American public? And have things changed, frankly, in the last 12 years? We're going to get into that question as soon as we come back from break. And as always, we want you to get involved as well. Get in our conversation online. Go to Facebook and Twitter and sound off. Should the U.S. get involved in Syria? And if you think we should, in what capacity? Our conversation continues after this break.